The moment Max Verstappen received a 5-second penalty at the Jeddah Grand Prix, his reaction was far from calm. His frustration was obvious, not just with the penalty itself, but with the reasoning behind it. The incident happened on the very first lap, when Verstappen and Oscar Piastri found themselves side by side heading into the corner. Piastri managed to apply the throttle just a fraction earlier, which gave him a slight edge at the apex. But instead of backing off, Verstappen let go of the brakes and turned in sharply, as if trying to stay in the fight for the corner. The issue was, he had already lost his claim to that racing line. The stewards saw this clearly and didn't hesitate to issue a penalty. From their point of view, Verstappen had no intention of giving the place back, which was reason enough to take action. But if you ask Max, he saw things differently. In his view, it was Piastri who had forced the issue, making a bold move up the inside, something that reminded many of Verstappen's own aggressive tactics in past seasons. The post-race press conference made it clear that Max wasn't in the mood to open up. When asked about the penalty, he kept it brief, saying he couldn't truly share how he felt because people can't handle the truth. He hinted that anything he said might be used against him, either by fans online or by officials. That's why, according to him, it's safer to stay quiet. Max explained that with the way things are now, especially on social media, even a simple comment can be twisted. So rather than risk a backlash or even another penalty, he chose to say as little as possible. He also spoke about how much the sport has changed. In the past, drivers could speak with more emotion, even frustration. Now, they're expected to filter everything. He admitted that sometimes it feels like you can't even be critical without facing consequences. According to Max, that takes away something raw and honest from the drivers, something that used to be part of what made the sport so intense. Once Max served his penalty, it became clear that his chances of catching Piastri were slipping away. The McLaren, running on hard tires, had incredible grip and consistency, making it nearly impossible for Verstappen to close the gap. While he did manage to reduce the distance to Lando Norris, it wasn't enough to make a serious impact. The 5-second penalty, though not the harshest on paper, was enough to compromise his race. And in the end, it cost him a shot at the win. Doesn't sound like too bad of a deal, especially for a team like McLaren. If it had been their car in the lead, they likely would have built a big enough gap to make the penalty meaningless. But for Max, that small time drop meant the difference between victory and frustration. Despite the controversy, it was that moment that shifted the race completely out of his hands. Now, with just a 2-point gap between him and Norris in the standings, Verstappen knows there's no room for error. Fans can expect him to push even harder in the upcoming rounds, especially with the rules around corner rights becoming such a hot topic. The idea is simple. The car that reaches the apex first gets to hold the line. In theory, it sounds fair, but in practice, it can lead to serious debates like the one we saw in Jeddah. Looking at the incident more closely, it's clear that Verstappen didn't have many options. He was already deep into the corner, and by the time he realized Piastri was ahead, it was too late to back off. Could he have handled the situation differently? Perhaps. If he had anticipated Piastri's move earlier, he might have chosen to brake sooner and use the slipstream after turn 2 to get a better position. But that's hindsight, and in the heat of the moment, decisions happen fast. Piastri, for his part, wasn't shy about his approach. He said he braked as late as possible, making it clear that he had full control of the situation. From his perspective, the penalty was justified. The FIA seemed to agree, backing up Piastri's decision. On the other hand, Red Bull's Christian Horner wasn't convinced. He printed pictures of the Turn 1 incident to argue that Verstappen had the advantage at the apex, and that without the penalty, he would have secured the win. His take? The FIA's decision didn't seem to make sense. Horner went on to explain that when you look at the situation in detail, Verstappen clearly had the upper hand at the corner's apex. From his perspective, it seemed like a harsh penalty, and that without it, Max would have finished at the front. He couldn't understand how the stewards had come to their conclusion, especially since Piastri had carried too much speed into the corner. For Red Bull, it felt like the FIA had lost track of what racing is all about. In the end, Piastri's victory became even more significant because the tire advantage McLaren had wasn't as massive as expected. Looking ahead to the Miami Grand Prix, it's clear that Verstappen will be on a mission. He's not one to back down easily, and with a corner like Turn 1 in Miami, it's going to be another battlefield for supremacy. Expect Max to push hard, determined to take what he feels is rightfully his. The final takeaway from Jeddah is clear. Piastri had the corner, and Verstappen had no right to it. His decision to lift off the brakes and turn in, despite knowing he wasn't ahead, didn't change the fact that he lost his chance to take the corner. In some ways, you could say Piastri pulled a move similar to Verstappen's aggressive tactics in previous seasons. The reality is, the FIA made a call that both drivers will need to accept, even if they don't agree with it. Verstappen might not be thrilled with the penalty, but it's clear that this incident has sparked a larger conversation about how penalties should be handled in Formula One. Should a driver who loses position after a mistake be forced to give it back? Or should they be allowed to keep going if the penalty doesn't drastically impact their race? These questions are worth asking, especially as more situations like this one arise. Fans and pundits have already started debating whether the penalty system needs a review. Looking back at the Jeddah incident, it's clear that Verstappen's experience and fierce racing instincts are always on display. However, with penalties like these, he's forced to rethink how he approaches situations on the track, knowing that even the smallest mistake can have big consequences. As the season progresses, we can expect Max to keep pushing boundaries, but he'll also need to be more mindful of the ever-watchful eyes of the FIA. For Piastri, this win was not just a massive achievement for his career, but also a statement that McLaren is serious about competing at the top. With more races like this ahead, both drivers are bound to face challenges and controversies, but that's what makes Formula One so captivating. The tension, the rivalries, and the constant fight for supremacy. It's what keeps fans on the edge of their seats. With the Miami Grand Prix around the corner, we'll see how Verstappen and the rest of the grid adapt to the ever-changing dynamics of racing. Can Max bounce back from his penalty? Will Piastri continue his winning streak? Only time will tell.